So I'm super excited to be here today to learn about the history of Beratung. And as a new employee here, I've learned a lot over the past several months, but I've never really gotten the full story, the backstory on all of this. And to me, that's really exciting because I know there are a lot of great stories there. And they're the stories of entrepreneurship, of following dreams, of the challenges, the highs and lows of all of that. And so today we really have a chance to get into detail from all of that, to hear from Greg, from Amanda, from Sarah. And I know, Greg, this story starts many, many years ago. You have a lot of entrepreneurial experience from a young age. And where do you want to start us from today?
So, Michael, the story really does start in my childhood and my upbringing. Mm-hmm. But I think really today it really focuses in 2014. So it goes a lot deeper than that. But in 2013 was when Amanda and I were married. And we were just talking about this. So as we prepared to tell this story, I went through a lot of journals and a lot of conversations with Amanda. And it's funny what she remembers versus what I remember, and then what's actually in the journal, right? So there were some time frame debates, right? So we went to the journal, which I wrote at that time, so we know the dates were accurate for that. But it really does start in 2014. And I think the one thing, though, that's clear in this entire story is God placed this in my heart way before I ever knew. Mm. And so one of the things of this was, I'm kind of laughing because when I look at Amanda, one of the arguments we had was she said that I've always wanted to start my own business. Mm. And she knew that from the time we were married.
Mm. Before that.
When
because when people ask me, wow, Greg works a lot, or Greg's so passionate about this, and he spends so much time with Beratung, and this is his whole life. Are you okay with that? And I'm like, I always knew. Greg never. It's never like he tricked me. I from the very beginning, from when I first met him, I knew he would start a company, and I knew if we were going to be married, I was going to have to be okay with that. So, and when we were having this conversation, he tried to tell me that he didn't want to start a company, and I was telling him, I always knew you were going to start a company. So that's how it...
Well, and it goes, and I want to jump ahead in the story when I was resigning from a firm I was working at, and my boss said, I'm all nervous, in his resignation, and he said, I saw this coming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like he knew. And what he meant was, when he expounded upon was, he said, no, Greg, I knew you would always start your own company. The quote he said was, I just hope it would be after I retire. And so what's happened there is every person when I launched this company told me they knew I was going to start a company.
Right.
But the part of that story that's missing there, and I proved to her in my journals that I wrote that time. So, I mean, these are pen journals. Like I can't go back and, erase it. But I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. I truly didn't know. And so I'm a person of faith. And so a lot of times my story comes through the lens of my faith. But in my faith tradition, there's a story of Jonah as well. And God's telling Jonah, hey, I want you to go to this town called Nineveh. And Jonah doesn't want to do it. Doesn't want to obey God. So there's these moments where he's on this boat and they're at sea, and God's trying to tell him, like, you're going into bad waters because you're not doing what I'm asking. You're not obeying it. Mm. So he gets thrown off the boat and a whale swallows up and puts him in Nineveh. So I refer to a lot of these as my Nineveh moments. So at this point in time, God wanted me to start this company. But I didn't know that. And I truly didn't know. Mm. But what's funny is everyone around me could see the entrepreneurial spirit. So I think a lot of times, and one of the lessons I've learned in life is a lot of time others know more about you than you do about yourself. Mm-hmm. And so in her memory of it, like I never said I wanted to start my own company, but when she remembers it, she remembers hearing it that way. And I think that's why there's always sides to a story, because it's how you viewed the story, right? And there's times where you're watching a movie and you're like, did you see that happen? Did you call that happening? Well, 3 people could watch it and one person can actually see that plot line coming through
your perception is your reality.
It's true. It's true. So it really started for me, the first Nineveh moment back in 2014. And it really actually, I guess we should start the story a little bit before this. I was at a big firm and I was leaving to go to another firm. One of my mentors in my life had reached out to me and wanted to recruit me to another firm, and I was very happy. At that point in time, I was about to get married, and I didn't want to go and change firms. And he started out the bill with, Greg, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse, and I'm going to get you to come work with me to put the band together. And there's a little bit of background on that too, because I was at another firm and he recruited me away, and I said I didn't want to join him. And at 15 minutes into breakfast, I said I wanted to join him, right? So I accepted his offer, and it took a lot of prayer and discernment for us, but we made this decision to make this move while I was about to get married. I had the offer letter, or excuse me, the resignation letter in my briefcase. It was a Wednesday. And I'm really nervous about this because I really liked where I was at, but I thought this opportunity and really to be with my mentor, because I believe having people to believe in you, just like Amanda's believed in me, are so important. So I really wanted to work with my mentor again. So Wednesday, I'm nervous. I have this resignation letter in my briefcase. I'm planning on doing it Friday morning. I am in a client meeting, and I'm at a bank, and the branch comes in and interrupts me at an office, and they came in, and I always ask to not be interrupted during a client meeting. So I thought something happened to my wife. That was my immediate thought. Like, if you're interrupting me during a client meeting, something, and at that time it was actually my fiance. And they said, Greg, Norma's coming. And Norma was my boss's boss. You don't want to get a surprise meeting from your boss's boss. That could never go well, especially if you have a resignation letter in your briefcase. So I'm thinking it's out, right? Like, they found out. Maybe somebody transferred my licenses too early, or what's going on. And I'm really just, that's not how I want to go down. I want to finish well. So I get out of the client meeting, and Norma was her name, shows up. And she is one of the nicest ladies I've ever met in my life. She's just like, it's hard to explain her persona if you've never met her, but she's always gave you a hug. It always made you feel good. And she shows up with my boss, and they're just niceties, just like, how you doing? I know the wedding's coming up. And it was like Charlie Brown's teachers, wah, 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 wah. And at one point I just interrupted her. I said, Norma, what are you here for?
What the heck is going on here?
And she's like, oh, you know what? You're probably nervous, right? Well, we just had a change, and one of our largest producers in the entire company left. And we've already sent letters out to the clients saying you're taking part of their book, and we need you to go to that branch, and we need you to start calling clients right away to retain the book. Well, I started doing some math in my head, and again, I liked my company, and this was an opportunity that I could not pass up. And the opportunity wasn't the client base. The opportunity was really the branch and the area and the people that surround me and supported me. The branch, I liked a lot of people there. So I had to make this call, and it was one of the worst calls I had to make in my life. I had the metallic taste in my mouth. I had to go to my friend and mentor and call him and tell him that Wednesday afternoon I changed my mind. I'm no longer going to that firm. I had to call Amanda and try to explain this opportunity to her and say, hey, I know we do a lot of prayer and discernment and make decisions together, but I've already made my mind up on this one. And I'm doing this all while driving to the other branch that's time sensitive to get there and start calling clients. And I had that metallic taste in my mouth that, like, if you're speeding and you get pulled over and you see the lights, you get this metallic taste. I was genuinely scared for the opportunity, but I knew it was the right thing. I knew my heart of hearts. So I called my old mentor and I told him what happened. And he understood. And he said, ultimately you got to do what's best for you and best for your future family, because he knew I was getting married. But he goes, and I always love this quote. He goes, Greg, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the situation. And he said to me, if you see me in a bar in a week, don't come up to me. But you see me in a bar in 2 months, I'll buy you a drink. And I just, that always like stuck with my mind, what he was trying to say and the way he expressed it made a lot of sense to me. So I'm in this branch, okay? And this is roughly 2013. It's actually spring of 2013. So kind of moving forward a little bit, bring us to this 2014 I want to start out with. And I've been there for a while, and I'm loving it. I'm surrounded by a great branch support system. At this point in time, I'm making more money than I ever thought I'd make in my life, doing what I love. They always say, like, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And I just can't get over how great life is going. My wife, we first got married, said we can buy a boat, and I always wanted a boat. So I had a boat. I have a wife. I have a house. I mean, literally, it's like this to me was like this dream, this fantasy. And the summer of 2014 was the first chink in an arm and the first Nineveh moment. And so the book that I had was heavily invested in unit investment trusts, which is a type of investment vehicle. And at the time, there was a particular type of unit investment trust that was what are called leveraged municipal bonds. And our company that I worked for at the time had a complaint from regulators for having too much in this product. And the clients I had a lot of this particular investment just because I inherited, accounts. When you work for a bigger firm and they just kind of give you accounts. So they sent out a letter to every client that owned this type of investment to have a conversation with their financial advisor. They sent this letter out with a fake signature of each financial advisor on it. The company they hired to do this was a third party and made a mistake. And all these letters were sent out to all my clients without me ever knowing there was a letter.
Wow.
And it was sent out to all my clients that had unit investment trusts that weren't even a particular unit investment trust they were referring to. Essentially what that's like is, they say a technology stock mutual fund. Mm-hmm. Maybe they don't want you in technology stock. That's not a recommendation or something. I'll give you an example right here. And they sent it out to all the mutual fund companies, essentially what they did. So I show up to work, and I remember clearly it was yesterday, it was a Wednesday, and I had over 50 voicemails from clients.
Wow.
I listened to the voicemails, and they keep talking about a letter they got signed by me. Well, my immediate reaction is, what is that? So I call the back office of that firm, and they basically tell me that they have no idea. So I call my boss, say, I can't return 50 voicemails a day to begin with, but I definitely can't call 50 voicemails. And these clients are saying like they're concerned, like this letter had a cause of concern in it. So what do we do at this point in time? So finally, I call my boss and explain to him, and he's concerned, and it moves up. The CEO of that particular company at the time was on vacation in Hawaii, did an emergency call. What they explained the situation.
Wow.
And I remember at the time I was very frustrated, very not understanding of what was going on. Because in this business, you have a currency of trust. And in my head, I lost all trust in my clients if a letter came out with my name on it, and I can't even tell you what it is. So we're on this call, and there was a person from the back office that instead of apologizing and showing empathy, basically was kind of rude.
Wow.
I essentially said to him, I said, tomorrow morning, when you come into your office, I'm leaving you 50 voicemails. And probably not the best thing to say, but I really made my point in the call because it made him pause and made a name for myself in the company. Probably not in a good way, right? I believe I had a great reputation. I always gave my all to the company while I was there. But I just remember being so frustrated. So that was a Wednesday. And I spent all day Wednesday, all day Thursday, and half day Friday just trying to get out in front of this. Not only call all my clients, they couldn't even give me a list of all the clients who got the letter. So I just called the client saying, you may or may not have got a letter. Let's talk about this. And that weekend was a weekend that I do every year as an annual canoe trip. And I always remember that canoe trip because I was just so frustrated. Like I needed that space to just be in nature and digest everything that was going on. That was the first time in my life that I ever realized maybe I would leave this company I was working for. Because at that point in time, I genuinely thought, and people used to joke that I bled the colors of the company. And I was a company man. I wore stuff all the time in the company.
Really? Do you like to wear things of the company you're with? I was going to say that too.
So at the same time, so this is roughly the summer.
Can I just catch up where we are? Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is entrepreneurial spirit that was recognized by many people close to you, except for you. And your life has gone in a couple different directions here. You feel guided by your faith. There are opportunities with your best friend and mentor, and then life circumstances come along, and then there's a hard pivot there. Mm-hmm. And then you're at this new branch. You got your new clientele. Everything's going great. You just married. You bought a house. You always have a dream for a boat. Now you got a boat. Now you're on top of the world. Everything's going great. Out of the blue, I just have this image of you're like hit by a baseball bat, like up the side of your head, something you have no control over. You don't know what's happening. And I sense, as you said, the first chink in the armor of your plan to be with this company, lead this company. And now you go on this canoe trip and you got a little like, I project kind of, what the heck is going on here? And what am I being called to do? And now I have a weekend in nature at least to, take some of that in.
Yeah, and two things I heard in there too that I think are so important is all the way in this journey, when I am at that point of frustration and confusion, God always met me in nature. Like nature always came. That's something I've realized looking back. That time, I mean, just happened to be a canoe trip. But why was that 3 days before my annual canoe trip? Like I do think that's part of God's story. That all throughout this, He calls me to be back in nature, to pause and reflect. I think the other thing you really said in there that really hit me was things completely out of my control. So my attitude at that time is I've worked so hard. I've built something, right?
Yeah.
And God says, whoa, let me bring you down a few notches. And this thing was a major crisis for me at that point in time. Looking back on it was rather non-eventful, but at that time it really was. And I think it hit me because of what was going on. So the other thing was happening at that point in time. So this is in July, because I take the canoe trip every year in July. This was, I had started the CFP coursework at that point in time. So story behind that is one of my best friends, Josh, went and got a CFP. And I had grown up in a firm that had always taught me the CFP stood for can't something produce. And you can kind of figure out what that language was. And they told me that it was foolish to get. And I kind of had that mentality. But I also was a financial planning nerd and studied financial planning. And so one of my friends that always called me for financial planning advice goes and gets a CFP designation, which I told him not to do. And now he has something shiny I don't have. Right? That competitive nature comes out. But also, he started to know a lot of the answers without calling me for them. So he must have learned something, right? And he could start to have some of these philosophical debates about financial planning. So because of that, I had enrolled into the CFP program, not because I believed in it, but because my friend had it. And going through this coursework was another, in my faith, we call it a road to Damascus moment. So there was a gentleman in the Bible named Saul. Saul was the largest persecutors of Christians. He's on this road to Damascus, and God stops him. He has his conversion moment, and he goes from being the biggest persecutor of Christians to the most prolific writer in the New Testament and one of the fathers of the church. So at this moment, as I'm going through this coursework, I fell in love with the CFP. And this really was a metamorphic change in my life. I'm so grateful for my professors, and I call them professors, but instructors at Duquesne that taught this program, that took time out of their busy schedule to do this. And one of the reasons why this was such a moment, because I understood this coursework was a good litmus test to understand if somebody had the basic knowledge to be successful. Doesn't mean they were great at their job, doesn't mean that there's a guarantee, but they were given the tools to be successful. So going through this really changed my entire framework of what I was doing. So this is going on at that same time, right? I'm going through this coursework, but there was an instructor there who talked about her business model was a retainer-only business model. And up at this point in my career, I had never heard of somebody paying for financial advice and not having investments. It was a completely foreign thing. I remember she was very gracious with her time. I would stay after class and just quiz her on this. So as this is all kind of going on, and I'm going through this, and I'm starting to have this chink in the armor, it's forcing me to stop thinking company-like and think outside the box. So with my friend I'm on canoe trip with, and my friend that with the CFP coursework, we start debating this. And I started saying, does this make sense? Are we doing business the way that is the best way to do business? You know, there's a famous saying I heard on a podcast one time is if you were going to start your business over from scratch and you had none of the current things, would you do it the same way, right?
Yes.
So I'm kind of going through this. So at that point in time, I'm at a hunting trip, and it was a bear camp trip. I remember distinctively. And I started pitching this idea to some friends that had wealth. And they told me it was the dumbest idea they ever heard, and they did not want to pay for a retainer fee. And so I'm starting to think maybe this is the reason why all these businesses don't use a retainer fee. So I'm going out and I'm trying to get people's opinions. And this is where I start to learn that when you have a new idea, most people will shoot it down and tell you how foolish it is.
Savannah bananas.
Savannah bananas. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I don't know the whole story, but we were just talking about how Savannah bananas started and how the man and his wife that started it, everyone told them they were so crazy, and now they're doing awesome and doing all kinds of new stuff.
So if you're not familiar with the Savannah bananas, it kind of caught me off guard, but she's saying like, hey, so Savannah bananas are a professional baseball team, but they started out as a collegiate league baseball team, and they started saying, how can we reinvent this game to be fan first? And they actually create their own version of baseball called Banana Ball. But when they did it, everyone thought they were crazy, and now they're one of the hottest tickets in sports. So if you're not familiar with them, I highly encourage you to look into them. But that's what it's like. It's this moment of whenever you have a different idea, people are always going to tell you it doesn't work. That's one of the reasons why entrepreneurship is hard. So I'm going through this, right? And so again, I'm starting to think this through. And I had this UIT moment. I've had this happen. And so we're in 2014. It moves into 2015. And I had this decisive moment in 2015. It was in early 2015. And this was one of my inflection points. This was a Nineveh moment. So I get a phone call, a voicemail from a client. At that time, my largest revenue client. So the client that makes the most money for the firm and is how I'm compensated. And I also got a voicemail from a friend that was a financial planner that had a financial planning question. So I have two voicemails. It's like a road to choose, like which one shall I choose? And I instinctively, without even realizing it, returned the voicemail of a financial planner that worked for a different firm. There's no way for me to make money or do whatever it might be. I just love financial planning. I'm a financial planning nerd, and I wanted to answer their question. And the client that called in, that was one of my larger clients, just had a really simple service question that wasn't pressing. And so I instinctively returned that call faster. And it wasn't at the time, like I look back on it and time stopped and I know where I was at. I can taste the feeling of the air, know what the temperature was of that room. But at the time, I didn't know it was an inflection point. At the time, I just instinctively did it. And it wasn't till I journaled. And that's one of the key things throughout this whole leadership journey is I can look back on this because I kept journals and I did year-end reviews. And I know what happened during that time period because when you look back on it, you don't remember. You wonder why these eyewitnesses get called into court, can't really remember. It's really hard to remember. And you swear you remembered it accurately. But I know when that was because I journaled about it that night. And I said, maybe, just maybe, I need to start a company. Because what I realized at that moment was I loved financial planning, but what I loved more was empowering financial planners. And the thing I wrote down in my journal is, I believe that you can only have an impact of clients of somewhere between 100 and 250. There's all these different studies. It's not just in our profession.
Yeah.
So let's call it 250. If I can only impact 250 lives before I die, how do I have a bigger impact? Well, I do that by impacting 250 financial planners who can in turn impact 250. And I think that's too many client households. We can debate that some other time. But that's really where this inflection point is in 2015.
So Amanda's with you on this part of the journey. And what are you seeing from your perspective because you have your own perspective on this journey?
It's scary, to be honest. I mean, it's really nice to know my husband works for a really large company, and it's really nice to know that his paycheck is there and it's not really something we have to worry about. And that's when, I mean, now I work with Beratung, okay? I'm very much still in the learning phase, but you have to understand these years, I really knew nothing, like really nothing. So he's really talking in about like crazy talk to me. But
language.
Exactly. But I see him and I see how he talks and how excited he gets. Obviously, you guys know this too. So yeah, it's just, I watched a dream grow and grow and grow and grow. And then it eventually just, he couldn't hold it in anymore, basically. So this is it's still growing.
At this point in time, realistically, I'm entertaining the idea of starting my own company. I'm not gung-ho and set on this. I'm exploring the opportunities because, quite frankly, I was making a lot of money. I was successful. People were telling me at my firm, you're doing a great job.
Right.
And you know, a motivator for me is not money. And we learned this, I will remember this. This is actually around this time, somewhere in this time. She looked at me and goes, you hate money. And I was like, do you remember this conversation? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, do you see that boat in our driveway? Because it was around the spring. We were getting it. I just got the boat from the mines. And she's like, no, like, you could go bankrupt tomorrow and it wouldn't bother you. And I was like, yeah. She's like, you don't see that's alarming? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you just don't care about money. And I was like, it was kind of an inflection point. She saw that in me. And I'm like, what she was really saying was, that's not what motivates me. And there's a stand joke that somebody could come and pay me $10 million a year to take Beratung away, and I'm not going to do it. What really motivates me, and we all have different motivations, this is what motivates Amanda or motivates you or motivates Sarah, but it's really success. And then how do you define success? So for me, it's about achieving goals. Like I get a really great satisfaction of having a vision and achieving that vision. And it's like, think about climbing a mountain. I just want to get to the peak. And as soon as I get to the peak, I want to take a look around. I've had this vision with God one time where, and I'm scared of heights, but I really want to climb mountains. Like it's like a big ongoing thing. And maybe God will give me the courage to do it at some point in time. But there's this like vivid vision I've had with God where I'm at this top of this mountain and I'm all sweaty from the hike and where snow's just falling. I'm drinking, like that's like to me, that moment, that's what success feels like. But I want to pause for an hour and I want to get down that mountain and climb another mountain. And that's really what she's realizing in me and seeing that's that motivation for me is success. Well, at this point in time, by everything that I was trying to do in my life, I was at the top of the mountain, right? And that sweat, that work, that feeling, and I'm pausing, I'm looking at this beautiful view. I have a beautiful wife, I have the beautiful house, I have this job where people are coming to me and saying, you're doing a great job, can I learn from you? I mean, in every single thing. So I'm fighting this Nineveh moment. I don't want to go to Nineveh, but God's telling me you're going to go to Nineveh. And I'm like, I really like Pittsburgh right now. Like, I really like this. Like, why are you doing this? And so you mentioned something like that with that UIT moment, how it really hit me. And this is again, so we start talking about things out of control. So right there, I'm finishing the coursework at Duquesne. It's the spring of 2015. That's when we had this conversation. I've been exposed to this retainer model. I'm kind of putting around with it. Well, right around there is when my firm decides to do a major software change. And what they were doing is they were bringing out better trading tools that were really a benefit for us. And I've learned so much as being a small business owner, sometimes there's, consequences of decisions that are unintended, right? And we always call them unintended consequences. No matter how many people and how many heads you get in a room, there's going to be things you just don't realize till you put them into action. So they brought out this trading software, and what they didn't realize was going to be a result of it was going to mess up all of our performance reporting or showing people how their investments have performed. And at this point in time, I'm doing financial planning for clients, but ultimately I'm at a firm that you do investment management and you happen to do financial planning for those that want it, not financial planning and happen to do investment management for those that want it. So really most clients and what they're paying us for is investment management. And so one of the things I would do in a meeting, and I don't do this anymore, but we would sit there and review investment performance at the beginning of a meeting. And they took that away from me, which was fine, but give me another tool. And I didn't have, like right now, what we use our financial planning software to show you where your percentage of goal and show you what your investments are doing. I had no tool. And it was a crisis moment at the firm. I mean, a lot of people were thinking about leaving the firm. So again, something out of my control, and it was causing a lot of headaches. And I'm not spending time doing what I love to do and be in front of clients. I'm spending a lot of time on the phone with other financial planners trying to figure out a way to serve our clients. And our leadership at the time was really not empathetic towards it. They were essentially saying, why are you guys making this big deal out of this? You're making mountains out of molehills. And really, and now if you gave me another tool or something to do it, they ended up later on realizing what the actual cause and effect was, and they fixed it. There was great leadership in that firm. It was a really great firm. I was really blessed to be there and be surrounded by great people. But at that moment, as somebody that's not seen how the sausage is made and just eating the sausage or seen the results of this, I'm now, just last summer, I had this moment, and so I'm very frustrated. And now I'm really getting into this. Is this the right way to do this? At the same time, this is right before I'm about to sit for my CFP exam, and the CFP board is telling me that all clients have to have a letter of engagement to work with a CFP professional. And I can't get my firm to allow me to have a letter of engagement at that time with my clients. So I'm now at two crises. One is, how do I serve my clients without the tools I need? And two, how as a CFP professional I'm working towards, I haven't taken the exam yet, but I'm starting to think through this. CFP professional, how can I meet the ethical standards of the CFP board and be my current firm? So late one night, I had a Jerry Maguire moment. And I found out when we were talking about this that not everyone at this table knows Jerry Maguire. So Jerry Maguire is a great movie. And if you're listening, I highly encourage you to watch this movie. So many feel-good moments and great stories. And I would say a culturally significant moment. But there's this part at the beginning of the movie, he's a sports agent. And he thinks that they're not, as a profession, doing things the right way. Not putting their clients first, all these other things. And so he late one night, sweating, types at a computer. I literally was doing that same thing. I stayed up late. Amanda's like, you going to bed? I'm like, no. And I wrote a 10-page thesis about the way this profession should be run. Now, the reality is we don't run our firm exactly that thesis because there was a lot of that thesis was naive. A lot of it was trying to be in a perfect world. But the basis of that thesis was the moment. After that night, I knew I was starting my own company. I had made that decision, that line of sand. That was when God threw me over the boat and swallowed me with a whale because I knew that there was no turning back. The anger, the frustration that was coming out in that moment and that thesis was real. And I knew that I hit my snapping point. I knew that, and I had to have this conversation with Amanda saying, let's start this company. And
let's catch up. We got a lot of big moments here, a lot of big ideas. So what I heard is you're in a very secure situation, making a lot of money, more than you'd ever made in your life. And you got the house and the boat and the wife. And then meanwhile, over on the side here, God is kind of dropping in bits of information. Circumstances are changing. There's frustrations. And slowly it seems like you're opening to this possibility that God is providing for you. And the other thing that occurs to me as you're talking is that quote about life is a big adventure or nothing at all. And you're being asked to choose the big adventure. And I think all of us resist. And then when we say yes to these life opportunities, then it's like all the power, all the energy, all the momentum is flowing in that direction.
It's so true. And that really kind of gets us, so I'm feeling now the direction's moving this way, right? And this point, this conversation is pretty easy with Amanda. Like, hey, I'm going to start my own company. It wasn't this easy, but this was not the hard conversation. That one's coming, where I really had to explain what the price we had to pay is. But at this point in time, she's supportive, and she's like, you seem really passionate about this. You know, what could go wrong, right? The whole real consequences.
No, I knew what could go wrong. I'm a worrier by nature. I knew what could go wrong.
You made it feel very, but she's always been my biggest cheerleader. And
My dad did it, his dad did it. So even to take it way back, like God brought us together for a reason. My mom will always say, Dad did this and now you're living it again. So we were brought together for this, for many reasons, but this is one of them. So I think, yeah.
And I think that's an important part of this journey. We met in 2012, and prior to that, both of our fathers had passed away in the recent years prior to that. Both of our fathers had worked for firms and started their own. My dad was an optometrist by trade. I did a lot of other businesses, but left another optometry firm to start his own. And her father was a financial planner and left a big firm to start a firm. So we did have this background. And that's why the story starts at the beginning. And we did have support systems from our mothers saying like what they had gone through when they experienced this. So there was that, but I still feel at this point in time, or at least I felt that part of the story, because you were always supportive of my ideas and crazy ideas, and everyone else has shut them down. You're like, sure, go do it. So I think there was some confidence because of the background that the real worry hadn't set in at this point, because I remember journaling about this, reading through the journals, prepare for this.
Well, it's really fun to get like, hyped up about a dream and an idea, and that's really fun. And then you're like, well, Amanda, like you spend this much money every month and you go to like TJ Maxx a lot. And like when we start to talk about tangible things and like cutting things back or cutting things out, it's like, oh, now it's like not so fun.
It's not as fun.
Which that story comes in the following year, right? So we're still here. We're in 2015, and we hit July of 2015. I'm sitting for my CFP exam. And a lot of people don't know this about me, but I failed the CFP exam. And that's one of the reasons why I teach the program at Duquesne. That's why I'm in the CFP board mentoring program to help people who have failed. I never thought it was even a possibility. I had never failed a standardized exam like this in my life. I took the Series 65 without getting the books, without studying. I just signed up a window and took it. Like I always got the 80% and 90% of these exams, and I knew my material. I knew the material before I went in there. Now, I didn't study at all. I just took the coursework. And so there was probably a little bit of arrogance to me. But I also took it again in November and didn't study and passed it. So I still this day, and by the way, when I took this exam, I've never felt more confident in exam. I remember like, this was like why I was so road to master. I'm like, this is the best exam I've ever taken. It's realistic. It makes sense. I remember like going there and so like, oh, this was such an easy exam. And the lady hands me this printout, and I was the second cohort of CFP exams that actually took it online, and we could get the printout right away and not have to wait for it to come in the mail. And she handed it to me, and I just didn't even look at it at first. I looked at it and said, you didn't pass. And I looked at the lady, I said, I think you gave me the wrong printout. I actually said that because I had not, like, and then the worst part is when I was telling people I failed, everyone thought I was pulling a prank.
Oh, wow.
Like there wasn't like, hey, are you okay? Like it was like.
They couldn't believe it.
Yeah. So now I'm at that, you said that momentum. She supported me. We made this decision. I had talked to somebody and convinced them to come and start this firm with me at that point in time. Everything was going momentum. And just something that was in my control at this point in time, because I probably should have studied. But, at the end of the day, it really, and there's all the way through this, God's test to me to make sure I'm going to Nineveh for him, to make sure I'm starting this company for him. So this is July of 2015. And so November 2015 happens. I pass the exam. And I'm at this point in time really deep in the research. So at this point in time, the first things I did was I created the core values. And I spent, we always talk about it, the absorbent amount of time it was to create the core values. And I have so many drafts of these things. I was just sharing some of the old ones with you of like where we started. And I took what I call the spaghetti approach. You throw spaghetti against the wall and some of it sticks. We use EOS. They use a term of you throw a bunch of things down and you say either keep it, combine it, or kill it, right? And that's kind of that process I went through. And not to have a consultant, it was one of my really good friends that was doing it, kind of pro bono work. But I worked with so many people. And that's really a great story I've told before.
So EOS being an entrepreneurial operating system, way to operate a business. Yeah.
Which we just implemented our firm a few months ago in 2022. At this point in time, I wasn't even familiar with the book Traction. So it really is this core values. I just knew core values were the most important thing to me. I hadn't really understood that from a business and books or anything like that. My dad was just really big on that. And I was like, I get the right core values. But at the time I was like, it's not gonna be an acronym. And it's funny, as I went through this process, it came out with an acronym because God has a sense of humor like that. Because like acronyms, people put them in the wrong order. All I knew is I wanted to be 7 or less because core values are core, not just values. We have other values here that aren't core, right? And it has to be something you can internalize. And there's a reason why phone numbers are 7 digits or less, because that's the amount of numbers that a person can reasonably memorize at a time. So we got the core values, we got the mission. And I mean, I had spent so much time at this point in time. I'd gone to leadership groups and proven what this worked. And then I went through the process of creating a name and a logo. And that's for another time or story when we talk about that. It's one of the things I'm really passionate about how we did that. But this was all created at this point in time. So, I'm really starting to feel the momentum. We have a logo. I have, at this point in time, I don't know if you remember this, so we order our logo, different versions of it, on a bunch of different material. So like pens and paper and shirts, to try to figure it out. So one of the things I had was fake business cards. And in our house, up in our bedroom, up on the ceiling, so I could see it every night, was a business card with Beratung in my name. And she told me, she goes,
This is my life. Like,
she goes, and at this point in time, we were blessed enough to have the ability to have a cleaning lady. And she always be like, I'm so embarrassed that the cleaning lady has to see what this business card is. And she's embarrassed. In my office, I have a check for $1 million written out to me at a certain point in time, and it says Beratung CEO salary. And so I'm very visual like this, and she just thinks I'm crazy.
I mean, our bathroom mirror is covered with pictures that are like, I don't know. Our poor daughter, she doesn't know any different. It's just so weird because it's a wide variety of things, which means something to him. But just like, man, every day I brush my teeth and look at this stuff.
She did make me get down the one that was a rhinoceros.
I was over the
And
rhinoceros.
she said, I can't brush my teeth and look at a dirty rhinoceros. So if you've never read the book Rhinoceros Success, really big believer in being a rhino in a way he's doing stuff. So I want to visualize myself being a rhino. And so that one is not allowed on our mirror. But if you've ever been to our house, a lot of other stuff is on our mirror. So we're really at this point in time, right? I mean, the momentum's coming, right? And I could not be more confident in where I'm going. Like I felt like I'm living the calling that God has put me on earth for. And it just goes back to the whole thing. Like everything's going right. And then November of 2015 hits me. And so I passed the CFP exam, by the way. So like I just passed the CFP exam. It was early November. And it's the Monday before Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving's already a difficult time at this point in time because my dad passed away, would be 2 years prior to that, 3 years prior to that, 3 or 4 years. We're in 2015, so would it be 4 years prior to that on Thanksgiving Day. So I'm entering this in, it's Monday, and I show up, and I lost at that point in time my largest revenue client. And I just get this notice, we call it ACAT, right? The accounts transferred out. No notice, didn't tell me. But the worst part about it was not that, because anyone knows me knows a dollar value doesn't matter to clients. It's the client relationship. And if I was leaving my firm and I counted how strong the relationship was, I would have counted this number 2 in terms of strength of the relationship would follow me to the end of the earth. And that rocked me. I went into depression. I literally left work. I wrote a thank you card to the client, said, thank you for allowing me to serve you. If you ever need anything in the future, please call me. And I mailed that out. I told people at the branch, I canceled my appointments, said I wasn't feeling well, and I went home. And I don't take sick days, although this past year was rough for me. I had a couple sick days. I can't believe how much I got sick, but usually I never at this point in time took a sick day. And I literally was depressed, like had trouble getting out of bed, went to sit in with the lights off, and I had never dealt with that in my life. And it was scary for me because I had seen my dad deal with depression. I'd seen my grandfather deal with depression. And now I'm like, is this what my life is? Is this all going to end, right? And it seems so simple, like, oh, we lost a client. It wasn't like my paycheck was really that much affected or life wasn't that affected. We still worked for big company. But it was losing this client relationship that I felt confidence. It shook all my confidence of launching my own company. If this person left me, and they left me for what I believe was a sales pitch, which really hurt me. If somebody did better financial planning that looked at parts of their financial plan that I didn't do, but this client didn't have financial planning when I inherited them, I gave them comprehensive financial planning, and I believed I was really making a major impact in their life. And usually my approach is, look, if a client leaves you, you paid a reasonable amount of fees and you gave them a reasonable amount of service, it's fine. But this really rocked me. And so my ability to grow out of this was, at the time, and I was an early adopter of podcasts. I actually listened to podcasts back when I used to listen to Word FM all the time. And I was missing some of the shows. I found out you could buy an iPod and you could go to the website and download the sermons. So I bought it. I would usually connect them. So I was really into that. So at that point in time, my brother-in-law had gone to hear a speech by a gentleman. And he said, you got to listen to this. And he couldn't find the recording of his church, but he goes, hey, I found a recording of this on his podcast. And it was the L3 Leadership podcast. And so he's like, you got to listen to this.
And it's funny too, because my brother isn't a big motivational speaker podcast guy. And in hindsight, it's just funny that my brother was the one to introduce Greg to this, because the next few days, Greg spent every waking moment listening to these podcasts really loud. And Doug Smith is someone that we both really value and care about, but I was so sick of hearing his voice. I didn't know him then. And I was like, can you please turn Doug off? Like, I don't want to hear any more Doug.
Yeah, I mean, now it's a friend of ours, but at this point in time, I didn't know the kid from Adam. You didn't know the kid from Adam. She was just like, I remember. I'm trying to find something to like shock my body to get out of this depression. And so I just know leadership books. Like I grew up, my dad would listen to leadership tapes. That's what I was going to turn to. And I was going to an audiobook, and he'd sent me this thing like probably like the Friday before. So I found it. And I also know that working on things. So we were renovating our house. So I went downstairs on a project I'd been put off for 6 months, decided to tear up a whole entire basement floor for the next few days. Like I'd already cleared out my calendar, wasn't planning on working until the day after Thanksgiving. So I had a speaker system, and I listened to the first podcast, this interview, and I was like, this is really good. And so at this point in time, there were 68 episodes of the L3 Leadership Podcast. They're anywhere from a half hour to an hour long. And so what I decided to do was start at the beginning and listen to everyone successively over the course of 48 hours or 72 hours. So it was like Monday night when this happened, right? So it was Monday night, pretty much worked throughout the night. I didn't sleep much during this time period. So like all Monday night, all day Tuesday, and almost all of Wednesday, I'm down there hammering on a floor, ripping it up, putting tile down, and listen to this podcast. I remember she comes down the steps, this is in our basement. She's like, can you please listen to something else? And Doug had this intro. She's like, she made fun of like mocked the intro. And she's like, if I hear this one more time. So Wednesday, I'm starting to feel better. I've listened to all this leadership stuff. I've got a lot of great ideas. That entrepreneur spirit's back in me, right? We're going to start this company. This is just a blip in the radar. And so I did send an email to Doug that night. It's kind of a funny story. It was a Wednesday night for Thanksgiving, and said, I just listened to every episode of your podcast this week. And I always remember his reply was like, this is like a typo, right? Like you legitimately.
Also, are you a stalker?
Yeah.
Like, should I lock my doors?
No, Doug, he just immediately said, let's get coffee. And I said, let's get coffee. So that's a whole other story for another time. But that's really where it was. I just remember being so depressed. And the reason why I felt depressed was all of my dreams at that point in time, or what I believed was the only thing that mattered in life. Like I wasn't saying like, hey, I have good health. Hey, I got this wife. I got money in a bank account. To me, I'm a futuristic person. And if my dream or my goals, again, that's what motivates me success, is where I feel like I can't attain them, I go into a hole. I'm like a turtle that pulls their head back in. So that was really a test of this moment. And that's where things got serious. After that point, when we came out of that week, it wasn't just any longer, hey, I'm starting this company next 10 years. There was a sense of urgency. That's why I started making all kinds of trips, doing a lot of back office studying. I was working 90-hour weeks, and you might say that math doesn't work out, and Amanda can attest to this. Like I was not sleeping. I was going and working 40 hours at my firm and spending every waking moment. I just had this real sense of urgency. So this takes us into, so that's November, right? We're in November 2015.
So just to catch up, there's a lot of confidence. Things are going well generally in your life. Out of the blue, your second largest client by revenue takes all their assets out.
Largest by revenue, second strongest.
So feeling, connection. And it's a shock. I don't know how else to say it. It's a shock, and it's a huge blow to your confidence. Sends you into this depression, which sends you right into these leadership podcasts and into sounds like a frenzy of activity, and almost like rebuilding the confidence from a stronger foundation is the sense I get of it.
Yeah, and I think the key two things I heard in there too that's so important is when you're depressed, and look, depression's a chemical imbalance, right? It's a serious thing, so I don't want to make light of it. But garbage in, garbage out. And what I needed was strong affirmations. And I always talk about this, and Doug actually, we're talking about this podcast, is a fan of John Maxwell. And him always talk about like, I feel like I know John Maxwell. I feel like Zig Ziglar is like my grandfather because I listened to him so much growing up. And like when you spend, like I told her this at one point in time, this was right after that. I've listened and talked to John Maxwell more than I ever had. Now, not now, but this is like earlier in our marriage, because I had spent, you think about a book's 5 to 6 hours, and I've read 30 of his books, and I've read a lot of his books multiple times, and you listen to this, like you start to grow this connection. So what I was doing was having a bunch of people that weren't telling me no. I had a bunch of people who were telling me, yes, you can do this. That's why that podcast worked. It wasn't that specific podcast. It was filling yourself. But you said there, I think it's so important. It was a blow to my confidence, not a blow to my ego. And I think so often this is framed as a blow to the ego. My ego wasn't hurt or touched or anything like that. It was my confidence was shaken. And I think that sounds the same, but they are different, because I think there's a lot of leaders out there. They're like, well, it doesn't matter because a lot of times if you're a really motivated leader, it takes a lot to shake your ego, but it doesn't take a lot to shoot down your confidence. And they're two totally different things. And I think that that's something I had to learn along the way. So, so we're in 2016, and this is where it got serious.
Yeah.
And this is where the real conversation. So Amanda at this point in time is making very good money, working for a company that she's worked at, and sense of confidence in this because she, at that point in time, had built on her own. Like she had her own apartment, and she had her own sense of income. Now she comes into a marriage and we own something jointly. And so this job, and I'm putting words in your mouth that you told me, was a source of independence.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
But miserable, absolutely miserable. And so I'm coming off listening to, hours and hours of leadership podcast stuff. And I'm like, just quit your job. You're miserable. Life's too short. Like you shouldn't just make an income, right? You should enjoy what you're doing. So I'm like, just quit your job. Cause she at this point in time says, I want to be a counselor and I want to work for nonprofits. So I'm like, do or do not. There is no try, to quote Yoda, right? And so like, just do it, right? Let's go do this. And she's like, well, can we seriously do this? What's the ramifications of that? I said, well, we could do this, but you have to understand, we have to start worrying about our expenses, right? That's what we're talking about. Like the expenses are a real thing. I also said, by the way, we need to get serious about this company, because at this point in time, I'm serious enough about the company that I have to start having the conversation of what is the price to pay. So you always hear like, what's the price you want to pay? And so I'm starting to say like, well, at this point in time, I already have the budgets created. And I'm like, so Amanda, what I think we need to do is we need to take our whole life savings, liquidate our retirement savings, everything. Who cares about a 10% penalty if I can make the kind of money we're trying to make? Like, we need to get serious. We need to take every dollar we own and let's put in this company. Let's burn the boats, right? There's a saying of you come to attack someplace on boats, you burn the boats because there's no return. We got to burn the boats. We got to take every single fiber of our being. And then I said, you know what? We were talking about this wasn't our forever home. I wanted to be a forever home. Amanda didn't, so we had to become one. So, by the way, I'm about to start this company, not have an income. So mortgage is going to be a thing. So let's just, again, burn the boats. Let's sell our house and take all the proceeds of our house. And let's just figure it out. Like we might live with your mom. We might do something, right? And we actually did live with her mom for 2 weeks because the house sold way faster. And we were in between getting a place. But let's go and rent someplace and not have to worry about fixing a radiator or a heater. And we'll figure out where we're going to go. So, I mean, that was a pretty tough decision as fairly newlyweds to do. But at the same time, if you're miserable at your job, let's just do it. Let's if we're going to burn the boats, let's burn the boats. So she quits her job at a great company.
In hindsight, it's very not all the greatest decisions. But.
And so now we have no income coming from her. Shortly, we're going to have no income coming from me. But hey, we at this point in time, and I think one of the key things is we put ourselves in a position. It's not like we created, we got inherited wealth or anything. We came from, middle class to upper middle class families, and we had a very blessed upbringing, and we have resources that most people could only dream of. But we're not talking like we had trust funds or money given to us or anything like that. But we at this point in time had saved. And, when I started making this more money than I ever thought, I had a financial plan. I followed my own advice, right? So we're in this position and we're going into this, and it's 2016. We've made all these decisions. And now we're getting down to like, what's the start date? We're finalizing things like, where's the location going to be? We're getting down to it. And so we were trying to decide between firms. And it was a really difficult challenge for me along the way because I was challenged because there was a couple firms that came in an opportunity and said, why don't you just come over here and be CEO of our firm instead of starting your own firm? And why reinvent the wheel, right? And does this really God want me to just start my own firm, or did he want me to lead a firm? And we're going through all this. So we had made this marker board that Amanda made. You want to tell what the marker board
Well,
said?
I just got so sick of hearing about this. Like, I need a list, and then I need you to cross things off the list, and we just need to look at it. So I got a wipe off board, small, put it right next to our TV in our family room. I said, I wrote, God, make it crystal clear. And I think I wrote 5 down that you were talking to. And I was like, we're leaving this here, start marking them off. I'm
you
over
wrote
this.
more, and then you erased it and said, that's too many, give me 5 or less. Which
right.
I love because it's something I would do. That's not normally what you would do.
And I think it's still in your office.
Still in my office.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We actually talked about this a year ago. I never did. We got to buy a lacquer to get over it because I'm afraid that like our daughter's going to knock that down from that stand and erase this thing because it is such an important part of our life. And it's a prayer that Amanda and I pray that anytime we reach a crossroads in our life, we say, God, make it crystal clear that your will is done and not my will. Because if it's left to me for discernment, I can't make discernment. I'm a wretched person, but make it crystal clear. And I think also, this is a really good time to point out, back to November, depression, we got a letter in the mail from our pastor. So he had no idea I was going through depression in the worst spot of my life. And I got a letter in the mail from our pastor saying, when I took over this church, I pray over my congregants. I take that pledge seriously. And I pick 5 members each Sunday. And this really just shook us to the core. It was unbelievable. And so I wanted to start that in my firm. And that really was one of those, like, again, Nineveh moments of like, you have to start a firm because you have to be able to write a letter to your clients saying, I pray over you. And we do that. That's a discipline I do is I take 5 clients every Monday and I pray over them all week. And I learned that from him. And such an important part of this journey that happened around that time. So we're 2016 and we finally make this decision in May. We're like, God, make this crystal clear. We got it down and we decided on a firm. So I go to this firm in a final due diligence trip down in Florida. I got back on Saturday and was supposed to, at this point in time, I had a business partner. We were supposed to sign the paperwork on Monday. So this is in May of 2016. And we're supposed to launch the firm, and I believe it was June or July. And I did not have that exact date written down in my journal, which bothers me. But I know it was around June or July. And so we waiting for the paperwork to come in. It doesn't come in. We call the person, our contact there. And what they tell us is they are no longer going to extend an offer to us. So they didn't like some of what's called a non-solicit from our old firm. Our goal was not to go out and solicit a bunch of clients. It's not what we were trying to do. Right. But they didn't feel comfortable with it. And, it was really, again, a blow, something out of my control. At this point in time, this is this long journey. We had made it a decision, right? We figured it out. We're in this height of doing this. And so this firm says no, and my business partner says this is the sign he's not supposed to do this. So now I'm back in depression. And I remember I did a last-ditch effort at the German club. I took them out for some drinks and like, hey, I can't do this alone. Because Amanda knows this is one of my things. I don't like doing anything alone in life. There's a reason why our first core value was teamwork, and I love to do everything together, right? Together is huge for me. Doing life, this whole thing, like, you want me to tell this journey. I can't tell this journey without Sarah and Amanda because they're really this journey's around, right? And so I'm just like, I don't know what to do, right? And I'm really just depressed again. I don't know what to do. And she's trying her best to be a cheerleader. And I'm like, this whole thing, this is not what we're supposed to do. And so I'm really thinking deep about this. We're going that marker board, and none of the options seemed like the right option. Like they were all clear to me that they weren't the right option. And we keep praying, God, make it crystal clear. Because you obviously made that one crystal clear. Like that was God's hand. I was not supposed to go that firm. So where do you want me to go? And I remember we were going to the beach with your mom. And I was depressed. Like I'm supposed to be at the beach, having fun, and I'm depressed. Melancholy. Like it's beautiful sunshine out, and I'm laying on the couch, miserable. And if anyone knows me, I'm not a very like lay around thing. I'm a go. Like I'm miserable. And I was really relying on her mom a lot because she went through this with her husband. I'm making discernment. And I was also relying a lot on my sister-in-law, Gail, at the time, was really helping me out with a lot of these decisions because she had a background in some of this. And I remember at this point in time, Gail's advice was, Greg, maybe you're not supposed to be an entrepreneur, you're supposed to be an entrepreneur. And in other words, an entrepreneurial spirit at a firm where you don't know. And I started to fall in love with that idea. And there was another firm that was really trying to recruit me. And I remember distinctively, there was a point in time where he said, Greg, look at the size of this firm. If you're extremely successful in 10 years, you can't build this. This took us how long to build it? Let my ceiling be your floor. And that really spoke to me. So we went to a dinner at the Duquesne Club and this was another thing that it's a big part of we actually first learned this from Commonwealth. The CEO of Commonwealth takes all their prospective employees out for lunch. As they grew, other people do that same thing. So now it's just the people he hires. But we actually take spouses out to dinner. And we learned a lot at dinner. And essentially one thing led to another, and they extended me an offer, and I ended up rejecting the offer. But I rejected the offer because it wasn't what I expected. And again, we kept praying this prayer, God, make it crystal clear. Had I made my own decision, I would have went with that first firm. Had I made my own decision, I would have went with the second firm. But God made it abundantly clear. He closed those doors. So now we're back to the drawing board, and there's 3 firms left, and there was 5 on this. And I didn't want to pick any of the 3. I was really struggling. So my thought at that point in time was start all over again. Go with what I was originally going to do, right? Like where we were going to go and just be a retainer model RA, right? So really I can't stress enough how lost I was at this point, how scared I was at this point. And I just kept being like, every time I can see the path there. I can see the finish line. You stop it. It's like being in a marathon. And when you're in a marathon, you turn and you can see that finish line. And somebody just coming running out, and Terry Tate, office linebacker, just tackled me and not let me go that finish line. I spent months preparing for that marathon. I've hit my wall already and gone through it, and you're not allowing me because of somebody that just tackled me out of nowhere. That's how I felt. And I don't want to speak for you, but I think you were just frustrated at this point.
I mean, it's just long. And anyone that has been married or close to someone that goes through this, it's hard to watch, especially when you can't really do anything. So yeah, it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch somebody struggle and think that they know what they're going to do, and then that doesn't work. And don't get me wrong, like Greg went through these things. I went through these things with him, and it was all for a good reason. But it's never fun in it, obviously.
So
never fun in it.
What's that?
Never fun in it, and yet you're supportive and loving, and in all the ways that you know how to. I
would like to think most days I was supportive and loving. It's hard, It's really hard. It's Greg is really good at seeing the future and believing in it, and I'm firmly planted in the present. So sometimes it's a lot harder for me to like go there with him. And I'm like worried about, well, like, what about right now? And he's like, don't, so just relationships, they're different and people see different things. So yeah.
So this is really getting to the climax here, because this is where the journey gets to God's hand and Nineveh comes so strong. So at this point, I'm still reeling with the fact that my business partner pulled out because he got cold feet because of this. I'm still reeling because the 2 firms that I had narrowed it down to, those doors closed. So I'm starting to feel like this pressure, like I'm being buried alive. Like there's this like, you start to feel this pressure in your chest. Like it actually feels like somebody's pressuring on your chest. It's hard to breathe. And I'm starting to narrow it down at this point in time. There was a firm of the 5 that at the spring I had already said, I don't even want to go there. So the person with my contact there calls me and says, Greg, you listed like 5 reasons why you would never come to our firm. We fixed 4 of the 5. This is September 7th at this point in time. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, yeah, we fixed 4 of the 5. I'm like, well, if you fixed 4 of those 5 major infrastructure problems, I can ignore the other 15 infrastructure problems because you guys are on this path. And he started selling him in his dream. This person came from the outside, was changing their culture. And really what they got me was they were going to do a lot of things. They literally changed policies at a large firm to get me to come on board. And so Amanda and I were starting to think through this, and there was a little rejection. There was a lawyer who told me that like he looked at the legal contract they offered me and was like, don't ever go to this firm. It's the worst legal contract I've ever seen. So there were some chinks in the armor, but we were starting to narrow in on it. At this point in time, we circled it on the 5 charts. And one of the reasons why that I really liked this firm at that time was my business partner rejected me. So I'm doing this alone now. And that's a big problem for me. I like have to do things together. I want to be with people. I'm a people person. When I was living with a roommate and he moved out and I was living on my own for the first time in my life, my friends actually started talking about they were going to do like, they joked around and talk about a watch. Like who's going to call Greg to see if he's all right. And they were going to paint me a Wilson, like from the movie Castaway, on my wall for something for me to talk to. Like I like to be around people, right? So I'm really at this point in time just like dealing with this. And we're starting to narrow in on this firm. But there's just like, do you ever get a sense of like just something's not right? And discernment's so hard. And there's ways to figure out discernment. And I have another whole thing where I've talked about how I figured out the best way for me to understand God's discernment. But it's still not perfect, right? And it's just the hardest thing to do is figure out God's discernment. So I'm feeling really uneasy about this. And on Tuesday, September 20th, is the date, we went out to dinner with spouses. Because again, this is such an important part to me is we're doing life together. We're becoming a family together. So I went out with some principals of that place that I was going to join and making sure this is right. And Amanda loved the dinner.
Well, I loved him.
Yeah, so she loved one of the people at dinner. And I did not feel good about it after the dinner, to be honest with you. I just felt like there was something, this wasn't where God wanted me to be. But Amanda, we already circled this. Amanda's like, you have to go there. And by the way, at this point in time, I'd already signed the paperwork to join. And I'd already started the October 14th date, which is the anniversary of Beratung. But I felt like it was more like this was the best of what's available as opposed to where I'm supposed to be.
Do you remember what he did? I actually just remembered this, and I thought it was really cool because something you always say is leaders serve, and he was essentially higher than you, right? And he had, like, not higher than you, but like coming in, he had more authority or whatever, and he gave up his office for you.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I chose this firm at this point in time is I'm starting my own company. And one of the biggest things, we had all the office layout, and it's really hard for me to start the firm and stand it up and have office expenses when it's just me. So one of the points I realized was I can't have my own office right away. So this firm was willing to let me come in. They had offices of their own and let me use their office space for free. Like it obviously cost money as part of payouts and all that other stuff, but essentially I didn't have to worry about anything. But their offices, and I'm sure somebody out there's going to listen is going to be offended by this, worked those offices, but they were gross. I literally told them that. I actually said it a little bit more offensively. I was like, I can't work out of these offices. There was just like a hole in the wall where glue from the wallpaper was hanging down. There was a sign in the one conference room that was misspelled, like a picture that had the word Manhattan, and Manhattan was misspelled. And what it was there's a great podcast, if you've never listened to, called The Ugly Couch. You can Google that at some point in time. But you just get used to it. I remember I went to one person's office, and they had a picture frame, and the plastic of the picture frame was hanging out like halfway. And so I just said, look, I can't work out of offices like this. And so what they did was they said, hey, we want you to come here. We're going to pay money to renovate our offices. We've been meaning to do it anyways. So they renovated it. And there was a large corner office because one of the things was I said I wanted to be, and part of the reason why too was at the time there was a firm policy that you couldn't have an independent firm name in the same building as their other stuff. So I had to have all my client meetings behind one door. And so he gave up a large office, which at the time I didn't realize how impactful and meaningful it was until everyone in the office was like, who's this person that took the corner office? To me, it was actually like, I'm giving up something to go to this. But to a lot of people, this was like an honorific thing. Like it was a way to honor me. And at that point in time, I'm still not feeling this the right fit for me. So I'm dealing with this, right? But that is something that happened. That was prior to that dinner, right? So we're coming to this dinner. Amanda's feeling really confident about this. I'm not. And so this is Tuesday. On Wednesday, I come home from work. And we had a dog at the time, Remy. And I got home, and it was a beautiful day out in the park. And I walked my dog out. So we still live in this time, we were living in the north side. And there's a park right there. And I go take my dog out to the restroom. And this is a story that I've only shared with a handful of people. When I say handful, maybe like 10 or 15 people. It's not a story I tell a lot. And so it's kind of hard for me to tell a story in front of the whole world. But I'm walking the dog in the park, and this gentleman gets off a bus, and I'm wearing a suit. And he kind of like makes eye contact with me. And, you know, I kind of live in the city. We try not to make too much eye contact sometimes. And so he's really beeline it towards me. And he's like, hey, excuse me, sir, I have a question. And so I'm used to a lot of times, and this is going to sound really bad, but like every day in the park, 10 to 15 homeless people come up to you and ask for money. And they start telling you these stories, and you know it's being used for drugs. And at this point in time, homeless ministry is a big part of our lives. We help out in the right things. I think a lot of people feel that if you see somebody homeless, you have to help them out. A lot of times you're not helping them out, right? And so this person who looks homeless, I mean, they smell like they're homeless, they look the homeless, they play a part, is coming up to me wearing a suit and asking me questions, which means they're trying to shake me down for money. And I'm kind of ignoring them. And he's like, hey, I have a message from God, which is another common thing that I hear a lot. I said, okay, I'm sure you do. And what's this message from God, right? Placate me. And he goes, you're supposed to start this firm. And you're supposed to go to that broker dealer. And I'm like, okay, now at this point in time, this guy's heard me on a cell phone before out here because I've been doing a lot of walks with my dog in the park and talked about this. And he goes, no. And your business partner, the reason why he's not starting his firm is because that's part of God's plan. And you won't understand it till later on in the journey, but you need to know that. So at this point in time, like, okay, this guy really listened to me. I got very skeptical. I'm a person of faith, and not that I don't believe that God brings prophets to us to talk, but who am I? Who am I to have a prophet from God to come talk to me about something? But at this point in time, we've been praying, God make it crystal clear, and I was not getting the wisdom and discernment at this point in time. And so the conversation goes on, and the guy starts telling me stuff that I've never verbalized out loud. He specifically starts to talk about my wife and what she's going through in this process. Like, you think this has been hard for you? You need to understand what your wife's telling God. And telling me things that my wife had told God that never expressed to me, that I never heard. And then he started telling me very specific things I need to do. Like, I need to pick out certain scripture, write it, put it below my wife's pillow of bed. He started telling me I need to praise God better. And so I'm in this park, and again, this guy's telling me, he's like, you don't know how to praise God. I'm like, I praise God all the time. And he was like, no. He'd be like, Abba, Father. And this guy is screaming on the top of his lungs with his hand up, screaming, Abba, Father. And he's like, can you do it? I'm like, yeah, sure. Abba, Father. He's like, that's not how you praise God. And he's having me get down on my knees in a suit in the middle of this park with all my neighbors around, with my little dog right there. And I'm screaming on the top of my lungs like, Abba, Father. And I'll tell you what, the moment I realized that it was a prophet from God, he told me a couple times, I'm a prophet from God. He kept telling me his name. He said over and over again, this is my name, repeat it. This is my name, repeat it. God's going to call on you to know what this name is at some point in the future. This is my name, repeat it. At the point in time I knew this was a prophet from God, all the hair in the back of my neck stood up. I've never been more scared that moment in life. And in the Bible, there's all these instances where God appears, and it always says, fear not. I've read that, I knew that, but I never really understood the awesomeness and power of God in our lives and intervenes because we think we're worthless. And we are worthless, but we're not worthless to God. And he does love each and every one of us individually, uniquely, and will show up in crazy ways in our lives that makes us feel like the most important person in the world. You know, I remember one of the thoughts in my head, like, can you go talk to the world leaders? I'm sure like the president of our country and the leader of some other country probably need your advice more than just me that's starting a company, right? Like, why do you manifest yourself this way? So the whole thing goes through, and there's a whole point of the story, a whole long part of the story that I'm not going to share, but I end up coming into my house. Amanda's not home. I sit down in a chair, close the door, and I stared at a wall for it seemed like days, but probably realistically 15 to 20 minutes. Just stared at a wall. And I remember one point, like I'm just staring, and my dog jumped up on my lap and like shocked me out of it. Like, what am I doing, right? And this is the weird part of the story. My first reaction once I snapped out of it, and I just remember being scared. Like, what does this mean? Like, what is God telling me that I have something that important that he had to communicate to me this way? Like, what does he have planned for my life? So my first reaction was to call my mother-in-law. I don't know how many people in life, when something happens like that, the first reaction is call your mother-in-law. I still this day have no idea why I called my mother-in-law. So I call my mother-in-law and I'm like, you are not going to believe what just happened. And the weird part about this too, she was actually at a Christian concert. It was, do you remember who it was?
I forget.
It was a Christian concert. Like she was randomly at a Christian concert. She came out. Like if I'm at a concert, I'm not answering my phone. Like it was just the most random thing. She answered her phone. Like here's the background. She's like, I'm at a concert, you know. So, anyways, she says to me, she listens to me. I said, I think I heard from a prophet from God that told me that I am supposed to choose that broker dealer. That this is what's supposed to happen in my life, and told me some things about Amanda and me that we've never verbalized out loud. I don't know what to do. And her initial reaction was, what'd she say? She said, we asked you where do you want to call? She says to me, she goes, yeah, that absolutely happened. Like, what, were you there? Did you visualize? Did you see this? I'm like confused by this, right? She goes, Greg, you don't know this story, neither does Amanda. But she said, my husband and I were in a very similar position when he was starting his firm. And we could make a decision. And we prayed a very similar prayer because she knew the prayer we were praying. And we got an unpostmarked envelope in our mailbox. That was somebody writing on behalf of God, as a prophet from God, that explained to them which firm they were supposed to pick and why, and details that they had never verbalized to anyone else. Because she said when they opened it together and they first read it, that they thought it was kind of like somebody put this in here from another firm that they, like, hey, pick Beratung because God, the prophet of God said this. But what they ended up finding out was there was things in that letter that could not have been anyone than a prophet from God writing to them. And she talked about how they've tried to like figure out the writing and stuff. And she's like, I can tell you the prophet from God spoke to us. And that really was reassuring. That was like an angel coming to me and saying, fear not. That's really what she did. And then I'm feeling good about this. I got the phone with my mother-in-law. My next phone call is going to be my wife this time. And you walked in the door before I could call you. And I said, sit down. I have to tell you a story. I just heard from a prophet from God. And what was your reaction, Amanda?
I was so confused, baffled. Are you drinking? Like, what is happening here? Like, I was very...
I think you asked me, what kind of drugs are you on?
Like, it was very alarming.
Like accusatory. And again, we talk about like people that love and surround you and support you and believe in you will sometimes kind of like say, you're crazy. And I remember like saying like, you were just like, you're crazy. And I remember distinctively going to bed and you thinking I was crazy. Like you didn't believe me at all.
I'm not proud of my reaction, but it was real reaction. So,
but I would have this.
It was, if you could have seen him too, he seemed like.
Like I'd seen a ghost.
Yeah, just a lot.
I was white. I was very like, it was very hard to deal with. By the way, had you told me the same story, I would have probably reacted way worse than you. There's no way I would have believed you. And I was having trouble believing it. So fast forward a couple weeks and Amanda's at work.
Can I catch up for a second?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can, Michael.
I'm going to try. Yep. And then, yep. And so you're seeing a lot of possibilities in your life. You're having a lot of conversations, and it's not clear which direction to go with. You've got these 5 firms. You've marked off several of them. They haven't worked out. And you're in the park walking your dog, Remy, and this prophet from God comes up to you and speaks, sounds like from God's perspective, and giving you advice and information about which direction to go in. And it's not clear how this person got all this information, and yet it seems very true to you. And you go home, and you're sitting quietly, and it occurs to you to call your mother-in-law, and she says, yes, of course. You got a prophet from God came to speak to you, and we had a similar experience. And then Amanda came home, and you're wondering, was he on drugs? Is he, what's going on? What is this reaction? Yeah, all of this. Yeah.
And just to clarify the dates too, because I did misspeak here. So, because I'm looking back at my notes from my journal. So this dinner was on Tuesday. I actually hadn't signed a letter. I forgot about this because I was supposed to sign a letter before the dinner, and I didn't because I was feeling uneasy. I did not want to sign the letter, and you wanted to. That was the prophet from God was Wednesday. Thursday after the prophet from God was when I signed the letter
Got it.
of accepting that's where I was going to go. So we had the start date of the firm, but still was uneasy on where to go. So yeah, so now, and to finish up this prophet story, so Amanda, she's going to work. Okay, at this point in time, she's working for a nonprofit, and she helps some clients that are less fortunate.
And I was telling my coworkers this story, and
And basically making fun of me at this point.
I mean, not making fun of them, but I mean, it's a crazy story. It's not something that happens every day. And, you know, as a person of faith, you would want to say, yeah, but I'm skeptical. I'm just I'm skeptical. And my coworker says, that's my uncle. He does that. He gets these messages from God and he gives them to people, and he's homeless. He's a homeless man, but he gets these messages from God. And I was like, wow.
Well, so then she calls me.
I never knew
okay?
that part of the story.
Well,
I had heard
this gets better.
That's
She calls
crazy.
me, all right, on speakerphone with this person. She says, Greg, that prophet from God, doesn't tell me like who she's talking to or anything, just called me. I don't know if she's on speakerphone. Greg, that prophet from God, what's his name? I immediately say his name because he told me multiple times, say what his name is. And she goes, I'm here with his niece. Because she says, she goes, I bet you this guy's name was this. And I was like, what? And so she started talking, and what was the prophetic word he said to her was she had a baby, and there was going to be a boy, and she was to name him something. At that point in time, she knew she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And it's like, so she said that part of why he's homeless, which by the way, I know what homeless encampment he works at and lives at, and he does not want help. I've helped him a couple times here or there. But she said one of the reasons why he's homeless is because people say he's crazy. Every time he has a job, he speaks prophetically to people, and it scares people. And the other thing is people want him to speak on demand. And it can't happen. And he's just like, when it comes to me, it just comes to me. And I think that's like a big thing that people have a hard time dealing with him. So yeah, so that takes us that journey. And so this is when I chose that firm. And so we launched, and so this was Tuesday, September 20th. We have the dinner Wednesday, September 21st, profit Thursday, 22nd. We finalized everything. And that's when we launched on Friday, October 14th. And this is the last part of part one, because I think this is where we turn this journey, because now this was our path to starting Beratung. The second half of this journey is starting Beratung, going from October of 2016 and taking us up into realistically the end of 2022. So I have to go and tell my boss at the time that I'm resigning. And I remember Friday morning, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. I drove about 30 minutes to his office and calling him because I knew he got in the office early, because I can't have my license transfer over until I resign. And I just will always remember that drive in. See, I had a prophet from God, made it crystal clear. I had a supportive wife. I had all those things, but that didn't make that day any easier. To go to my boss, who I respected, to go and walk away from that job. And so I think the lesson I want others to hear from that in their entrepreneurial journey is up until the second you make that decision, you might want to back out. Do you remember me calling you for a pep talk?
I think I might have blacked it out.
I remember very distinctively being in my car driving to Greensburg and be like, I need you. I felt like in Top Gun, like, just talk to me, Goose. Like, I just needed something, like just something. You were like Harry in Days of Thunder. Like, I just needed that voice. Like, I needed something in my life to just tell me, because I was so nervous. And luckily, like, my boss had answered that early in the morning. He's like, hey, I'm being in the office in 10 minutes. And he knew what it was all about. And I remember circling around that block. And it was a block that's kind of like vertical and just walking in circles. And I felt like I was going to wear out the leather in my shoes and being so scared to make that decision. And that day was a day of ups and downs. And through, like, that whole day, I just remember being so exhausted. I had planned out, remember, I had like lunch made and dinner made and everything. But man, that whole stretch, really from that October to January 1st, I don't remember much. And my journal is not as well written because it was a blur. But the one thing I will remember about that time is having a supportive wife. One of the things men used to say all the time is when somebody passes away that we know, and they don't have that support of God, you feel bad for them. Like you wish they had, like, what's the meaning of life? And I will tell you, if somebody's going through an entrepreneurial journey and doesn't have a ride or die partner, I don't know how you do it. So that's one thing that I think that time I'll remember. But the last thing I'll leave you with at that point in time, that first part of this journey is, I remember distinctively, one of the firms I looked at earlier on in the journey didn't make sense was Morgan Stanley. And they had his manager there who's just a remarkable person, remarkable individual. And he said this comment to me. He said, Greg, whatever firm you join, you choose us, you choose another one. The first 3 months to 6 months is going to be a honeymoon phase. And every single time you do something, it's going to be a confirmation bias. See, these systems are better because you spent time figuring out the right firm for you. Everything's going to be better. But at a certain point in time, you're going to have a client call you and they say something as simple as like, I need $1,000 from my IRA. And you're going to say, I don't know how to do that. And then you're going to try to figure it out. And it might be a better way or a worse way, but it's a way you don't know. And it's going to cause you pain and frustration. So he always said that second half, which is either it starts at month 3 to, month 12, or it's month 6 to month 18. Everything that your current firm you do, whether you started on your own or not, is going to be stupid in your eyes and dumb. And they don't know what they're talking about. It's going to be foolish. And that really, I tell everyone that ever changes a firm, be prepared for that. Because no matter what research you do, no matter where you're at, that's what that's going to feel like.